Okay, hello everyone. We should be live now. I'm just double checking the YouTube stream is catching up because there's always a bit of a delay. There should be a slight 1 minute gap or so. There's always a bit of lag. I just want to make sure you can actually hear me and I'm not just talking to myself. But it should be catching up now. Okay. Not sure. Okay. So I don't know if we are actually live on YouTube or if there's a slight problem with the recording. I've got some numbers here, so some people should be connected. We'll press on ahead. If someone who's watching this on YouTube could drop a message in the chat, that would be helpful for me. But anyway, let's start. I'm going to share a presentation here. Okay, so I see we are actually live, so that's good. Great. So I'm Stefan Bayer. I represent Oak Security, and the idea of this workshop is to show new Web3 companies or new projects some things they can do to avoid being in the news for security incidents. So it's titled "Don't Be Next: Learning from 7 years of Web Security Auditing." Because that's what we've been doing the last 7 years, auditing Web3 projects at a number of levels, and we want to share our experience here. So, quick note on myself and my business partner, Philip. Oak Security was founded by the two of us some time ago. Philip sometimes gives this talk, sometimes I give this talk, sometimes we give it together. But Philip is an economist and I'm a computer scientist. And that's really the two angles we look at when we look at security, economic issues, and computing or IT security issues in Web3 projects. The company employs 52 security researchers. We've been around for a long time. We've audited over 400 projects, or we've completed more than 400 audits. Some were for the same projects. We've discovered thousands of issues. And here on this slide, you can see some of our biggest customers. There are many more, of course. It's just a quick summary. But since this is not about the company, let's get right into it. By the way, you can ask questions in the chat. Due to the lag on YouTube, it's about a minute behind, I see. I might be slow in replying, but I will eventually get to any sensible question. So let's start then to talk about blockchain security. So as a security company, we look at layer ones, layer twos, smart contracts. And what our clients want to know is, of course, are blockchains secure? And our answer to this is always that blockchain protocols are using cutting-edge cryptography, which we currently think is unbreakable, right? So blockchains should be secure, and at the protocol level, they usually are because of this good technology that is being used. Of course, there can be errors in the implementation, but in principle, they are secure. So why then do we see news like this all the times? This is Rect News. It's a platform or an aggregator for blockchain recreated security news that just lists incidents that happen. And this is the front page snapshot or screenshot from back in May. It's a bit out of date, but it would look very similar today. There are weekly incidents where projects are hacked, funds are stolen, and a lot of things go wrong, which is, of course, concerning. And why is that? So we've looked at this, of course, and we've sort of classified the security concerns that are there in Web3 blockchains or Web3 applications or blockchain projects in general. And there can be different classifications, but this is ours, right? So there are smart contracts, Usually smart contracts implement some type of protocol. There's key management. Blockchain is all about keys, right? We access blockchain accounts with our keys. There usually is some off-chain code involved, right? We access smart contracts through an API, usually some sort of web interface or a mobile app, and we interact using traditional software. There's infrastructure involved. Blockchain runs on nodes. Everything we use to connect runs on hardware and software. The operating systems involved, node software implementations, cryptographic libraries. There are a lot of things that are involved that can go wrong. And finally, there are humans, and humans are a very special case, and every cybersecurity analyst will tell you that humans are the weakest link in the chain of blockchain security or any type of IT security, really. But when we look at these, only the first two are blockchain specific, right? Smart contracts only exist really the way we usually use this term in a blockchain environment. And key management is something more common. It's used outside blockchain, but it's really a key component of blockchain applications. It just doesn't run without keys. So key management is much more important. And then there are humans. Humans are always involved, but in the blockchain, they have a slightly different impact because blockchain is all about giving power to the user. Small example is this: I have to manage my own accounts, usually if I want to truly decentralized applications. And if I lose access, I've lost access. If I lose in a centralized system, for example, my bank card, I can always go to a bank, physical bank, or show my passport and get access back. So there's a different impact with what the human can do wrong there. But all the rest is really off-chain code infrastructure and some of key management and some of human interaction is what can go wrong in normal cybersecurity. There's nothing specific to blockchain here. So if we look at these individually, these classes, there are smart contracts, obviously, are meant to be publicly accessible. They usually hold value, at least interesting smart contracts hold value. I can write any silly smart contract, but those that we usually talk about implement anything that has to do with value. That doesn't have to be financial value. It can also be an identity or something similar. But there's usually something that should be protected in some way. They're also immutable, and that means we cannot fix bugs. Now, these three properties, well, immutable, that they can be upgradable, of course, depending on the platform you used, and there are always workarounds to make them upgradable. But in principle, they're immutable and very hard to fix. So these three properties are very important for them to work. That's what makes them smart contracts, but they also make them a very big target. And errors in implementation of smart contracts have been a big source of security risk, and that's why we do audits. Yes, a real-world timeline of a DeFi project we observed in the wild. This was a very big project. It was some time ago, but I still leave it in this talk because it's very relevant, and it's a good example of how crazy this has become in terms of security. So on a Tuesday evening, the smart contracts of a big DeFi project were deployed. By Wednesday, there are $580 million, or the equivalent of $580 million in smart contracts. By Wednesday evening, a bug in the smart contracts was discovered. And by Thursday, there was a complete price collapse, and the project was essentially dead. Right? So that's obviously a big problem. And it's an extreme example, but it's not unique. And there are smaller examples that still have a big impact. Won't mention the name of the project here, but those that have been around for a while might figure it out anyway. So here's another interesting screenshot from the Rect aggregator news site, and it's it's a top list of the top 10 of exploits in terms of how much value was stolen or lost or locked or in any way compromised. And there's some interesting observations here. Now, the first observation is that some projects here were not audited, right? And the other interesting thing is that the highest valued exploit of all time on running network had nothing to do with smart contract security. It even had very little to do with blockchain security. It was a compromised off-chain component where keys became accessible in a way they shouldn't have been, right? So that just goes to show that there are a lot of non-smart contract or non-blockchain related cybersecurity things that can affect this world quite a lot. So let's move on to key management. Users manage keys, protocols manage keys. They've got privileged accounts, developer accounts, deployer accounts, admin accounts that might configure something, accounts that should only be managed by governance sometimes. There are many ways of thinking about accounts, but essentially at the end, there's usually an account involved. And these accounts require keys. And keys can be stolen, they can be lost, they can be accidentally made public, they can be uploaded to GitHub by a developer who was not careful. A lot of things can happen, right? So we have to be careful, and we have to really think about key management strategies in our Web3 projects. So the first thing to think about is storage, right? How are keys stored? There's software key vaults that can be used that sort of store them secure in a piece of software, or as securely as possible with a piece of software that runs on an operating system that uses a lot of libraries that could have any security issue in general. It could be on a cloud. HSM is hardware security module. It's a specific key management piece of hardware. Or in the cloud, it's usually virtual. Amazon, for example, provides such a service. Or it can be an on-site hardware module. The easiest example or the smallest example is probably USB hardware wallet, but there can be more industrial-looking rack solutions that's slide into a server rack. But anyway, there are pieces of hardware that allow keys to be stored much more securely. When we use keys, we have to think about what is happening. We can have important functions or admin operations depend on multi-signature procedures. For example, we need 3 out of 5 signatories to sign for a transaction to be executed. That's very useful for certain important things, and it also protects the organization within, because there might be a rogue element with access to the key in the organization, and if 3 of 5 have to sign, that's less likely. There should be some sort of logging. We should be logged somewhere whose key has been used for what, or at least we should think about implementing something like this. And then obviously we need a policy, right? Like who's getting access to which key? How do we issue new keys? How are keys revoked when they're not used anymore? What do we do when a key is compromised? And that's true for everything, right? We should have a protocol in place for when things do go wrong. With keys, it's important because, sometimes nobody knows what to do if a very critical key is suddenly made public. And yeah, it's important to think about these things early on in any Web3 project. So moving on to other pieces of off-chain code, there's sometimes databases involved, there's usually websites involved, key management, APIs that could be configured incorrectly. Wallet software is very dangerous because it can be compromised in a number of ways. We might see an example if we have time. There are bridges sometimes involved, which can be centralized or decentralized. Each has their advantages and their dangers, but they usually involve a lot of off-chain software that is quite complex and sometimes includes a lot of cryptography, but we get to that. And that's obviously all traditional cybersecurity, right? So all these things can be attacked in the same way as other pieces of software. There's no difference of hacking a Web3 project's website to hacking a food delivery project's website. Common incidents here are insecure authentication, cryptography used wrong, right? So cryptography is very powerful, but it's also very easy to completely misconfigure it. There are general software vulnerabilities, like logic bugs that could be exploited to do something that is not right. And there could be backdoors, right? That works for any piece of software. There could be, do you trust all your developers? These Web3 projects usually move around a lot of money, and sometimes we employ a freelancer from the other end of the world, which we don't even know his real name. I've never seen a KYC or a passport or anything like that. And we basically let them write their code, right? Our code for us. It's often easy for a developer to build in a backdoor somehow. So just a very simple case study on what can go wrong, which has nothing to do with Web3 security and is traditional cybersecurity. And it's a very interesting case that happened last year, and it was when Balancer's DNS was hijacked. Now, Balancer is a very established Web3 project. It's been run for a number of years. They've been through a number of audits. They know, and they've learned the hard way how cybersecurity works. And they are generally considered OG crypto project that knows what they're doing. But in September 2023, someone managed to execute a social engineering attack on their DNS provider, right? I don't know who the DNS provider was in this case, someone like GoDaddy, or I suppose, or maybe a smaller provider, or even Google. But there was an attack directly there. They managed to get control of the Balancer domain by redirecting the DNS. And they just built a malicious site, just replicating the Balancer, which ran on the correct URL, on the right domain, and trick the user into signing malicious transactions. In that case, not much happened because some advanced user detected it relatively quickly, and it could have been much worse. But it's interesting because it shows two important examples, how something completely unrelated to any of the complicated cryptography we use or any smart contracts can lead to a very huge problem. And it also shows an example of a supply chain attack, right? It wasn't even Balancer's own cybersecurity that had a problem. It was the DNS provider, someone you just pay $50 a year to get the DNS or whatever you pay, right? But it's worrying to think about what can happen if you go up the chain. Infrastructure, I don't want to go into too much, but as I said before, there's network security usually involved, APIs, permissions can be set incorrectly, there's node software, a lot of these things can go wrong. The node software itself sometimes has security vulnerabilities. That has happened before several times with the Bitcoin implementation, with several Ethereum clients, with other blockchains. Solana has halted, I don't know how many times, 9 times already, due to vulnerabilities or mistakes, bugs in this node software. The operating system that hosts validators might be compromised. There are denial of service attacks on these machines. An eclipse attack is an attack where part of the network is isolated and can't see the other part of the network. So you can basically, depending on the consensus algorithm, either freeze the system or make it look at a minority chain, which doesn't represent the latest state of the network. A number of things can go wrong. So let's talk about humans, because as I said before, humans are the weakest link in all this. And that's because humans are generally lazy. They do irrational things. Your users will do things you never expect completely non-deterministic, right? You can think of all the possibilities anyone could possibly do with a web interface, with a smart contract interface, with anything, with any piece of software, and they always find a different way or way of abusing the system, and it's quite amazing what users try to do. And a lot of it is not even malicious, right? But there's a big issue between the user experience and security. It's usually trade-off, right? Which means that the user is the weakest link in the chain. I'll talk a bit about this trade-off in a minute, but things that can happen is that users get tricked into using the wrong UI, and they will always blame the project, right? So there might be a Google ad for coming up first when they search for your project, and they click on the first link. It looks similar. There's one letter different in the URL, and then the user is using the wrong UI, and there's nothing you can do about it apart from complaining to Google. But the users will still blame you. Users will get their keys stolen. They blame the dApps they interact with. Developers, right? They're humans. Do you trust them? Will they run off with your money? Will they have backdoors? Will they have deployment keys and deploy a different version of the smart contract, which is slightly malicious? A lot of things can go wrong at the user level. Here's an example that I quickly took a screenshot of this. It's an old example, but when it happened to me, I took a screenshot. I clicked, I was looking for Yearn Finance in this case, and got to clicked on the wrong link. Google tricked me into clicking on the wrong link, or someone tricked Google into providing the wrong link. And I got to this, and immediately when my wallet tried to connect, I was asked to put in my wallet seed, which of course I didn't do because I know about these things, but new users might not, right? So I took a screenshot. Other people might have put in their wallet seed and then have their whole wallet drained. That's just a very typical example. So going back to this trade-off, it's really difficult to build a dApp with a secure user interface that is also usable, right? So there will always be a trade-off between usability and security in a Web3 project. And the trade-off depends on how you configure it, and you configure it in accordance to what the risk is and what the worst case scenario is, right? So what's the probability of something going wrong, and then what's the impact, right? If it's a little game where not much can be lost, I mean, there are important games, but you know, if it's sort of pocket money, you might reduce the security a bit in favor of usability. Very simple example: the most secure private key for a wallet is written on a piece of burn-proof paper or chiseled into a piece of stone and metal, possibly split into 3 pieces and kept on geographically different sides in a fireproof safe, hidden from you, right? But it's completely unusable. You can't send a transaction with that without making huge effort. Whereas at the other end of the scale, you've got a browser plugin like MetaMask, which is not very secure due to keyloggers and other things that can go wrong on your own host computer or your mobile device or whatever, right? So we have to be very careful and configure this trade-off in accordance, both at the user level and at the project level. So besides these 5 categories I mentioned there for security concerns, on the blockchain, there are also basic principles that can be and are usually exploited. You've probably heard about MEF and front running, the maximum extractable value. There are ways to avoid this now. Some are more comfortable than others, but it's still a problem. Basically, what it means, the blockchain, or most blockchains, have a very basic principle that there is something called the mempool, where all the unexecuted transactions are visible, and validators, miners, or whatever they're called in the particular consensus mechanism, fill blocks by picking from these transactions. But this mempool, this pool of unexecuted transactions, even if it's for a very short time, is readable to anyone in most systems. There are now systems that try to avoid this, but generally you can see unexecuted transactions. And what can be done, you can actually overtake transactions by paying a higher transaction fee, because basically you choose how much you want to pay, and miners or validators' most basic algorithm is filling the blocks up in order of by maximizing their payout, right? So that's how they choose the transactions, and you can overtake a transaction and maybe replace it with some knowledge, or make use of some knowledge you've gained from observing a transaction. And just to show a very basic real-world example of this, the ERC20 token standard has a built-in vulnerability in the standard. Obviously, these days, most implementations have a way to avoid this, but in the actual standard, if you implement the ERC20 token just following the standard, you are vulnerable to a front-running attack. And I don't want to go into the details here, but you can actually get people to hand over more control over more of their tokens to you. You can be approved to spend more tokens on users' behalf by using a little trick based on front running. I mean, it's on the slide here, but I don't want to lose too much time on it. The interesting thing here is that it's a very basic standard used by everyone, and it's vulnerable to this. Front running is obviously very valuable or very useful to people in trading and arbitrage scenarios, and the sandwich attack, where you manage to sneak in and attack a transaction before a transaction you've observed, and then one after, can be used to make good use of knowledge of what's in this transaction. So that's a very common attack. And there are ways to avoid this in the way the smart contract is written, and there are also ways to avoid this by using systems that bypass the mempool somehow. But anyway, I've already mentioned supply chain security before, and there's a tendency in crypto or Web3 projects to use very complex stacks of software. There's a lot of dependencies, and any of these can have vulnerabilities, meaning a lot of things can go wrong in a piece of software that you don't even control yourself, that you're just using. An example could be some sort of NPM import for a JavaScript library that has a keylogger or something, and store and keeps track of when you input your password or sends it to somewhere. But that's a very simple example. There have been examples of cryptography being compromised by genuine errors or bugs in libraries, or maliciously by introducing bugs. A very simple case happened last year again, and it's the Wiper compiler. It's an interesting case study. The Wiper compiler is an alternative to the Solidity compiler. It basically allows us to build Ethereum-compatible smart contracts using a variant of the Python language, or using Wiper, which is very similar to Python or inspired by Python. And it's got built-in reentrancy protection. However, in the implementation of this, there was a bug, and then all the projects compiled with the Wiper compiler, even so they were thought to be not reentrancy resistant, they were suddenly vulnerable, or they were in fact vulnerable. And once this became common knowledge, a lot of projects got exploited through reentrancy attacks. A reentrancy attack is a very basic attacks. I'm sure most people will have heard of it. If not, it's easy to read up. I don't want to spend any time of it because we only have a bit less than an hour. But it's been a problem since the early days of smart contracts, since 2016, I believe. So we've audited a lot of smart contracts. We've audited a lot of layer ones, and we've audited a lot of layer twos more recently. But we've been active for 7 years. We've also audited bridges, wallets, pieces of off-chain code. And there are a number of things besides these security concerns that I've already mentioned that we've observed in these 7 years, which we would like to present here quickly. So the first thing really is that the best teams follow best practices. They keep it very simple, right? And that's a mindset problem. When we start a Web3 project, there's usually this startup vibe. People are very excited. They want to go to market really quickly. And they're treating this a bit like a mobile app, not like a piece of financial software, right? So the first thing to realize is here that we are building financial software. I mean, not all of you might be building financial software. There might be an identity project or something like this, but you're dealing with software which has some sort of value and criticality to it, and usually it's financial, right? So the financial sector works relatively slowly, the traditional financial software, for a reason. They've learned the hard way, and they've got experience in building financial software that they've gained over 70 years or more. And we have observed a lot of bugs in Web3 software that wouldn't be present in 1970s bank software. Basic things like overflow and underflows have been known about for a very long time, right? So there's no excuse really at this point. But one thing to realize when you're building financial software is that you need financial expertise, right? So if you are a project that has a financial model, get someone with a background in finance economics to review this model, because if not, the model itself might not be sustainable, might be insecure, or might have a critical flaw. You should do that slowly. Keep it simple. Don't innovate everything at the same time, right? Roll out features step by step. It's very important to specify and document everything, right? You can have a very good economic model. You can get a financial expert to review it. But if your developers don't fully understand it and implement something else, and that's something we very often see in audits, we see that there is a specification, the model is sound, but the actual developer goes and implements something else, or and it's usually not as subtle as just getting a simple formula wrong. It's usually they misunderstand it because it's not written down in a way that is understandable to them. Follow any best practices, of course. There are a lot of guides for how critical software should be developed, and testing throughout is fundamental. There are now very good testing softwares, or frameworks for all of this. There are things that help you automate unit testing. You should have unit tests, you should have integration tests. You should consider things like fuzz testing, property testing for certain parts of a protocol where that makes sense. And that's even before you even think about hiring someone like us for an audit, right? The second piece of advice here is that audits may miss vulnerabilities, right? We and our competitors, we do our best to find all vulnerabilities, but the software stack for these things have become too complex, right? Nobody can give any guarantees. And particularly, there are some things that are extremely easy to find in testing, but incredibly hard to find in an audit, and vice versa, right? There are things you would never find in testing, but a good auditor can easily find. And there are things that property testing or formal verification might catch easier or more easily than an auditor or testing. So there are several layers, and audits are never an insurance policy, right? So as much as it hurts to admit this, we do sometimes miss certain things. And that's why we always talk about the Swiss cheese model, which is a term that we haven't invented. It's been around. But basically, it means that each slice in a cheese represents a measure, a security measure. And there are holes in each of these. Each has advantages and disadvantages, and they all miss certain things. And by combining these layers, hopefully you cover up all the holes, right? So you get as many layers of securities as you can afford, and hire us, maybe hire someone to get your testing set up right, or invest internally in security and testing. You might talk to someone about formal verification. You might hold a bug bounty program, audit competition. There are a number of things that can be done. So if you look at the development life cycle, there are a lot of things that you can do starting right in the design phase. I've already mentioned specification, documentation, and the simple architecture are fundamental for a developer to actually develop the right thing. And obviously at the development level, there are a lot of things you can do, and we can help you as well. We don't just provide audits, we also provide advice and consulting at the early stages, right? We can help you set up best practices, improve your code quality, readability. You can have internal code reviews, which we can help you build internally the process to do that. There's testing you should perform. There are non-happy path testing scenarios. Just think about test scenarios that are against what should happen. There are a lot of things that can be done. We particularly think fast testing and invariant testing is very useful in some of these finance Web3 projects, because there are usually a large number of parameters that can have very strange effects if they're combined in a weird way. And having writing down a set of invariants and testing against them randomly in a fuzzing way is very effective. Code also doesn't stand still, so you should get regular audits for new releases, not just once and then keep hacking. That's very important for the release process. Very strict policies should be there. I mean, the important thing is to have a policy. That's the first step, right? And then there are things you can do once your protocol is live. You can have ongoing bug bounty programs. You can monitor the smart contracts. You can have rate limits, to make sure things go relatively slow once the numbers get very large, or there are limits in place. You can have circuit breakers. You can have an incident response team prepared. So there are a lot of things you can do. The important thing is to inform yourself about them and decide what you need and get policies for each of these. So I've already mentioned that we do audits, and there are also contests, audit contests, and there are bug bounties, which all behave in a similar way, but they all have their own advantages, and we believe they should be used in combination and not isolated. I mean, it's always budget depending, of course, but audits generally have few auditors that are very specialized, go very deep into a project, and they're able to find complex issues because of this usually. When you do a contest, an audit competition, something like Code Arena, you can have much larger number of auditors or people looking at the code, but they don't have an incentive to dig really deep, right? Because the deeper you dig, the more time you lose, and at a certain point, the returns as a bug hunter become diminishing. Particularly if a project has very bad code quality or there are a lot of issues, the payout usually for each individual participant in the contest goes down. Some platforms try to change that a bit, mix it up a bit, because it's not fair that the deeper you go, the less you're paid. But they're very good for finding certain common issues, and you may be lucky and get a really diligent auditor participating in a contest. And the breadth of the whole thing, the number of people participating, might increase your chances to find certain things, but they probably won't go as deep. And importantly, they have no commitment to your project. They've not signed a contract that they go through the whole thing, right? They can do whatever they want. But it's still very effective because you get a lot of people to look at your code. And then bug bounties are sort of a last resort. A bug bounty must be very high, right? So it usually hurts when you have to pay it out. But the idea is to incentivize someone to report an issue instead of exploiting it, right? So basically you want to turn the black hat into a white hat hacker. And that is expensive and should be done after the other measures have already been performed, because if not, you'll just end up paying the bounty relatively quickly. Okay. The other thing that we've learned is over 7 years of security auditing is that audits are usually performed of snapshots on a code base, and there's usually continuous development process where people have different releases and they add features and make a new release. And for this, some of our competitors like to sell retainers. Obviously, retainers are a nice business model, so we tried this at the beginning, but we figured out it doesn't work very well. And the reason for this is that the things are not linear, right? So if you have a retainer with monthly payment and then uneven receive cycles, the incentives don't work anymore, right? So the auditors are usually ready, waiting for a release when there's nothing to be reviewed, and vice versa. And suddenly there's a big block of code and not enough time to review it. And we found that it doesn't work. So instead, what we do is we provide a credit system where we make a contract on a number of audit credits that can be consumed. We make some pre-reservations for each month to bring down our lead time, because there's usually a bit of a backlog. And we give a discount. But it basically means that there's much more flexibility and when the credits are used. You don't just pay for 2 security researchers to be on standby. The other thing we've learned is that most common issues are logical flaws, right? So obviously, as a new Web3 project, please look at the standard footguns. If you're a new Solidity developer, or even if you're a seasoned Solidity developer, look at the Solidity footguns. Make sure you know the common vulnerabilities. But the big errors we see in audits these days are flaws in the logic, not in very basic things. This is from a list of ranking the issues we find, and logical flaws are the number 1 issue. Lack of access control is very common. Unbounded iterations are still a big problem. Inconsistent state, front-running issues, rounding issues. Rounding, and it's also interesting if you look at the most common exploits. It's like re-entrancies issues and things like this were very common a while ago. We still find re-entrancy vulnerabilities in code bases we look at, but there are not so many exploits of this now as there were before, because people consider it more covered. Front running and sandwich attacks are very common still, but the latest trend we've seen were rounding exploits, right? So very small rounding errors can add up in a protocol, and with sufficient large numbers, they can be exploited. And black hat hackers have realized this and have started to build attacks based on this. But anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there are a lot of things beyond the basics of smart contract security that can go wrong. So this is sort of where we come in as a company. I mentioned audits a lot, and that's our signature product, or service. But we also can help as early as possible. So if you are thinking about working with us, contact us very early. We provide economic consulting. Even we have PhD economists on the team that look at the economics of a project, always from a security mindset, right? But we also look at, is this secure in the long term, or will it just work during the next bull cycle and things like this. During development, we can help set up your secure development environment and processes. We can provide fuzzing and invariant testing, or at least help you set up, teach you how to do that, and help you set up the invariants and automate things. We can provide threat modeling, ongoing audits, normal audits. We do penetration testing for whole systems. We've pen tested validators, wallets, any piece of off-chain software. We can help with release management consulting, and during the operations, we can help you on operational security, but we also have partners that can help on monitoring and things like this, where we can set you up with someone else. We can't do everything. We don't have a monitoring platform, but we work with people that do. Here's a quick example on what a security audit looks like. I'll go through that very quickly, and then I'll shut up. This was a Snow Bridge, a big bridge between Ethereum and the Polkadot ecosystem that we audited. Usually a report looks like this. The reports are always made public on GitHub. We insist that they're public. There's a summary of findings. Some issues are acknowledged and some are resolved. Usually they are ordered by, always they're ordered by severity, but critical issues should usually be addressed. Here there's one acknowledged, but that's not always the case. But when we have an issue, we sort of write it up. We have a recommendation below, and we obviously review that the recommendation has been implemented, or if it has been fixed another way, we also review it and we update the report, and then we write resolved next to it. If a client doesn't want to resolve an issue, either because it doesn't exactly apply to the way he intends to use the smart contracts, or because they have a different opinion, they acknowledge the issue and they get a chance to provide a team reply, which we copy verbatim into the report. Here we have sort of a security model where we basically make a threat model. This is a technique adapted from traditional cybersecurity, where we basically look at the assumptions of the system, the shareholders, the stakeholders, and it's all based on the Stride model or process, which was invented in the 90s or late 90s by Microsoft, but we've adapted it to work in a blockchain Web3 scenario. Basically, we have we list threats for the system in particular scenarios. We classify them, and then we have a mitigation matrix, and that really helps the project to think about what can go wrong and how can they prepare for this, and how likely is that something goes wrong. In any case, that's it basically for this workshop. We hold another one next week, I think, where we go deeper into the Swiss cheese model, what can be done at each layer, and what holes are there in each layer of security measures. I've not seen any questions in the chat. I don't know if that works. In fact, I don't know if anyone is hearing me, because I see people connected, but I've not had any message in the chat saying that I'm actually audible and that what I say makes sense. I'll wait for another 30 seconds or so to see if anyone has any questions. If not, please feel free to reach out to us. There's our information here on the screen now, hopefully. We are on Twitter, but we are easier to reach under this email address. you can look at our website, of course. And we are happy to get on a call anytime to advise new Web3 projects or even seasoned Web3 projects. And yeah, either Philip or myself will usually be happy to get on a call relatively quickly. Okay, there's one question in the chat here now. What's next in the cybersecurity field? I don't know if that refers to cybersecurity in general or cybersecurity in Web3, but it's probably similar in both. I think we can make a lot of use of artificial intelligence to both attack systems and defense systems. We are about to publish an article. Well, we are writing it now. We are in a piece of research on disclosing, in a way, how our auditors use AI right now. And that should be interesting for projects in general. Okay, so then there's a follow-up question here. Crowdsourced audit bug bounties all appeared relatively recently, but don't pick up momentum. Would you say there's a crisis of ideas? Not necessarily of a crisis of ideas. I mean, yes, in a way, nobody has come up with the perfect way of holding a crowdsourced audit. There are always disadvantages. As I said before, it's difficult to get people to have the right incentives to look really deep, because we know it. I mean, we encourage our auditors to participate in crowdsourced audits as well. They're all free and encouraged to work on Code Arena. And when they do, they usually report back that they have sort of an 80-20 approach. They look for the big findings, try to get a big payout. But at a certain point, it doesn't pay off for them to look deeper, right? So they don't go in as deep on a crowdsourced platform as they do with in a real audit. But then again, you have a larger number of people, and some might dig in very deep. So that nobody has come up with the right platform yet. And this is probably a problem. I know Hut Finance, which we work with quite closely, have tried to do an alternative model. I don't know how successful that is. Bug bounties are quite successful. There is a problem in deciding when a bug bounty should be paid. Some platforms try to help, like Immunify. You have someone in the middle who helps making decisions. So it's not the team themselves deciding if a bounty should be paid out, but that's centralized. I've been working with, in a previous version of our company, we've worked on a bug bounty platform that was meant to be decentralized. It was very difficult to do that in smart contracts, and it was essentially unsuccessful. So it's also not ideal, but bug bounties, I think, are relatively successful in that they've prevented a lot of big exploits. Okay, that was just a follow-up comment by Vladi. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, so yeah, I think we've covered a lot. We've had some questions, so the chat at least seems to work. I'm happy to see that someone actually listened to me and I wasn't talking to myself. Hopefully we'll see you again for the next workshop. There's another question here, which is interesting. With the advent of AI and AI agents, can audit be made way cheaper, as this is a pain to most developers in this? Yes, I mean, we as auditors, we do realize how expensive we are. The reason is because it's very expensive to have the right talent, and these people are very difficult to keep in your company. Auditors are headhunted very easily between competitors, and they all want to earn good money. It's understandable because they spend a lot of time and have invested a lot in their education. And it requires a certain mindset to be a really good security researcher. But obviously for new Web3 projects, that's a big problem. And if we tell you that you have to hire several audit firms because we won't find everything, that's obviously not very encouraging. It is very expensive, and AI might make a difference there. What makes a big difference there is also if you have the right security measures set up internally. If you get to an audit well prepared, the audit can be much shorter and much cheaper. And AI will play a big role there, right? So AI will be very useful for the project itself to do at least part of an audit before it even gets to us. Okay, I'm also informed there's a problem with the charts that I didn't set up correctly, I suppose. We'll try to solve this for the next workshop. There's not much I can do about it right now. But anyway, thanks for the questions, and thanks for listening. If you look at the program of this, you will find our next talk sometime next week. Okay, that's all for now. Bye for now.